I don't know if everybody's familiar with STAAR and basic research. Maybe I should share some few words so you know who our hosts are. So STAAR is a FCDO funding technical assistance facility. It's dedicated to expanding and improving effectiveness of investments, both in social protection approach in crisis and gender-responsive social protection. BASIC, which stands for Better Assistance in Crisis Research, is also FCDO funded, and it's examining, why, how, and when to use social protection approach in different crisis contexts. And the idea is to deliver more effective social assistance so that vulnerable people cope with better with crisis and meet their basic needs. So thank you for hosting us, STAAR and Basic Research. We don't want to talk too much at you. We want to know who you are first. And I see we are now 48 people in that room, so that is great. And we would like you to first rename yourself so we know who you are and what is your organization. So if you're familiar with Zoom, you have your bar below your screen. And if you click on participants, then you'll see your name and you're able to put your name and your organization. So thanks for doing that so we can see who's there. We also would like, as people join, to just sense how you're arriving. You're probably out of a busy day, so you can use the chat function also in your Zoom bar to please let us know how are you arriving and how do you feel right now. And we can read that slowly. And as you do that, we also would like to invite you to maybe stretch a bit because it's going to be 1.5 hours that we're going to spend together. Yes, you can shake a bit, you can breathe, and we hope you can be fully present for that 1.5 hours with us. You're going to experience a bit of a different webinar today. It's going to be participatory. You're going to be invited to work in breakout rooms later on. And so, yes, we invite you to be present in that call. Thank you so much. Let me see if we have Megan, who's there. Thank you. Any words about how do you feel? Are you tired? Are you excited? Are you wondering what is the subject about? Please share a few words so we can sense that you're present with us. And I don't know whether I'm seeing the chat. Excited. Thank you, Vincent. Excited to get other people's perspective, interested to learn the insights. I was sad to miss the forest in person. Greetings from Cameroon. End of the day. Tired but excited to attend this webinar. Thanks, Patrick. Thrilled to learn. Thanks, Zamira. Wonderful. So I sense some excitement and some eager to learn. So let's move on a bit. Hi, Rachel. I'm keen to hear people's reflection. Wonderful. We also, that's to just sense the energy in the room a little bit. The second thing we'd like to do is to know a bit more who you are. So we're gonna post a link in the chat, a Menti link, and you will be asked 2 questions. They are not too difficult, but that will help us to see who's with us today. So you have different ways to be able to respond to those questions. We advise you click on the link that is now in the chat, and you will have another window popping up, and that you can then put your answer there. If you need to use your phone to do so, you can use the flash code on your screen. This is going to show a little bit a little bit small, so it's probably easier on your computer, but it also works on the phone if you have to. And while you're doing that, I'm going to continue reading how people are. Claudia, very interested to hear about the seminar, but sad I have to schedule a clash and I will have to leave. Okay. Is the Menti working for everybody? Yes, I see Paul's thumbs up. Wonderful. So maybe Anna, I don't know if you want to start sharing screen so we see a little bit how things are popping up. Wow, we have a good representation from Africa. Wonderful. We've heard we have someone from Cameroon, but some other countries as well. A big part of us is in Europe, and we have our Brazilian colleagues. We have someone in the US. Wonderful. Let's wait to have a bit more. I can't. I should have. Someone is in Asia. I can't know exactly what country that is, but that's great. So we have diverse perspective. That's amazing. Maybe, Anna, we can go to the next question because that's also an important one. So not only do we want to know from where you are geographically, but also this, we're talking about social protection in conflict and sensitivity. So we know we should have interested people from different fields. So you were asked to define your area of expertise, and we see we have a lot of social protection experts, and with some of you working in the overlap of conflict, social protection, and humanitarian, and few representative from humanitarian space, and someone none of that. So we'll have to discover in the next sessions. Thank you so much. This is to sense who's there. So lots of social protection specialists with us, and a nice diversity of participants from the different continents. Thanks, Anna, for sharing, and we can go to the next slide. If you don't mind, was there a next slide with some housekeeping? So few things. So first, this webinar is recorded. So thanks for agreeing to that. And you are also able to follow this conversation in French if you prefer to. In order to do that, in Zoom, you're going to see a little globe in your bar below. And so if you click on that and you would like to listen to the webinar in French, you're welcome to select the French channel. If you also would like to read caption, you should have a CC button. If it is not appearing in your bar directly, you also have 3 dots with more, and that's probably where you can find that option. You see you've all been muted for now, so that we can keep the sound manageable, but we will open mic at some points to have some Q&A, and you will also have the opportunity to discuss and share when we are going to move to breakout discussions. So the Q&A will only be open for dedicated moments, so I will let you know when that happens. Thank you so much. With that, I'm sure you're really keen to start digging into what this webinar is about. So we're going to start by giving you a little bit of an overview of what was the forum about and what was the outcome, maybe a bit of, how it went and what activities did participants do. So you're going to learn about that. And you're going to see that there are some topics that have emerged from the discussion during the forum. And we're going to give you a very, very quick glance of what's been produced in that plenary session. But you will have the opportunity to dig into one of the aspects of your choice during breakout sessions. You're going to learn more about those topics. So you will have to choose your topic of interest and get to learn a little bit more. We'll end this webinar with some reflection from participants and some closing remarks as well. I hope it's okay for everybody. I hope everybody can follow nicely and technique is working for everyone. And with that, I'd like to invite Paul Harvey. Paul, you're partner of Humanitarian Outcomes. It's a consultancy organization that's research humanitarian action. And you're also the co-director of the Basic Research Program, which is led by IDS. And you also are a co-technical lead. You were a co-technical lead for the forum, so involved in the preparation and the design of it, alongside with Rachel Slater. So Paul, if you can just let us know what has happened and what were the outcome of those 3 days that we spent in Rome. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. And yes, I will talk for 20 minutes or less and give you a quick sort of gallop through what we discussed at the forum. The forum was co-hosted by FCDO, the German and US governments, WFP, UNICEF, and the World Bank. So I had a sort of complex web of stakeholders involved in planning it, with me and Rachel Slater, as Caroline just said, working as sort of technical lead, supporting that process, and working closely with all the colleagues at STAAR and DAI, notably Chris, Anna, who helped to organize it, and Sophie. So thanks to all the co-hosts, thanks to WFP for physically hosting it. Next slide, I'll move on to what we talked about. So when it was 15th to 17th October in Rome, it had about 150 people there, who you can see in the picture, invited as individuals, not representatives of, and as individuals working on social protection in situations of conflict and fragility, trying to get a mix of types of stakeholders, of people from countries affected by conflict and fragility, of people working for different types of organizations, of people working for governments and outside of government. It was really hard to get the right people in the room. We tried hard to do that, but lots of apologies to the people we should have invited and didn't, who are here. Lots of welcome backs to the people who were at the forum and are coming to this as well. The intent of the forum was to strengthen global action on social protection in conflict, to strengthen buy-in amongst global stakeholders that social protection is possible to support in situations of fragility and conflict, and to develop lessons on how to do that better. We did our best in designing the forum to make it as sort of participatory and open as possible, to avoid having too many panels with PowerPoints like this, with dull people like me talking, and more interactive discussion. And we kind of, the flow of it was we shared experience on the first day. On the second day, it was a completely open space where everyone talked about what they wanted to talk about. And then on the third day, we had quite a structured process where all the participants developed a charter for action, which is what I'll sort of run you through in a minute. Next slide. Just before I run you through the charter, this is sort of my take, I guess, on sort of the main issues that were talked about, you know, in the first 2 days, and then that flowed into the charter. The first was sort of emphasizing, as I said, the sort of the objective of the forum, that social protection in conflicts and supporting social protection in conflicts is possible, is happening, that there's lots of great experience to learn from and share and discuss, but that we need to sort of generate more senior political buy-in to being able to support it. Making the political case for greater investment in supporting national systems for delivering social protection, even in situations of fragility and conflict. And making that case, you know, on multiple levels, partly on a sort of normative level, that it's the right thing to do, that supporting, you know, more nationally led and owned systems is the right thing to do, but also that it can be more effective and efficient, so that more resources can go to those most in need. There was a strong sort of focus throughout the 3 days on the importance of system strengthening. The idea of having a sort of social protection first type of lens to asking why not social protection, in the same way we sort of challenge ourselves to ask why not cash in discussions about the role of cash in humanitarian emergencies 10 years ago. And that system strengthening focus should look beyond just payment systems and transfers, important as those are in getting help to people, but look at the sort of broader ways in which social protection needs to be supported, both the need to support transfers, but also to support the workforce that delivers social protection, and to think about you know, protection and the role of social workers, as well as and case management, as well as the role of giving people food or cash. Also the need to take sort of peace and conflict seriously. Often we find ourselves in discussions around social protection and fragility and conflict, talking about supporting social protection, fragility and conflict, but forgetting about the fact there's a war going on. and talking about it as if we can do the same things in Somalia as we can do in Ghana, when clearly that isn't the case. So need to focus on conflict sensitivity, to bring in the expertise of conflict experts, to think about sort of intentional design with peace building and social cohesion objectives, and to build the evidence base on how and whether social protection can contribute to peace, given the current flimsiness and issues with that evidence base. And then the attention to gender and inclusion is critical, both because it is critical everywhere, but because it's particularly critical in particular ways in situations of fragility and conflict, because fragility, conflict, and displacement disproportionately harm women, girls, people with disabilities, and minority groups, and that we need to understand the ways in which that happens and what that means for how social protection needs to be designed in ways that can tackle marginalization and exclusion and can help to mitigate the gendered consequences of conflict and fragility. So that's the 4 key issues. Caroline, you promised me a timer, but I'm not seeing one. So maybe give me a sort of 10-minute warning and then a 5-minute warning, so I don't go on for too long.
15 minutes, Paul. So you still have to...
Next slide. So that's what we talked about for a couple of days. And then on the 3rd day, we had an incredibly intense attempt to develop a charter for action around what we just talked about. And I'm going to present it in a minute. It's important to sort of realize what it is and what it isn't. Yeah, it's not an official document that organizations have signed up or committed to. It's sort of no more or less than the collective ideas and priorities of the 150 participants who are at the forum. Our hope is that it presents a sort of agenda for action that can be taken forward across multiple forums, that isn't intended to, replace or be instead of important existing initiatives. It's intended to complement things like the SPEAC-B initiatives and the development of guidance around the SPEAC-B principles, not initiative, principles. And it's intended to inform ongoing policy and practice, including across all sorts of forums like the G20 Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, the Global Accelerator for Jobs, the Global Networks Against Food Crisis, the Global Refugee Forum, USP 2030, and lots of other things. So it's intended to be an input into how we can do social protection better in situations of fragility and conflict. On that note, turning to the Charter. Next slide. So we ended up with about 15 points. And what I'm going to present now is a sort of slightly edited, condensed version of that, partly so I can fit within my 20 minutes, partly because this is how we thought it might be helpful to edit it. So the first point from the Charter, first 2 points in a way, were around this sort of system strengthening focus, asking and stressing the idea of a sort of social protection first and by default approach, and that it should be a core approach for interventions in situations of fragility and conflict, that we should attempt to strengthen national systems, that we should think about the role that existing social protection systems can play in humanitarian response, as we are at the moment in Gaza and Lebanon, for example. And so, yeah, sort of re-emphasizing the message we wanted to go in the forum with, that supporting social protection in situations of fragility and conflict is possible, and that we can still sort of maintain, strengthen, try and preserve national ownership and systems. And then a point around coordination, where many years ago as an aid worker, and I always feel uneasy about these sort of calls for more coordination, because I think of the amount of time I spent in coordination meetings and wince slightly. But there was sort of general consensus that the platforms for coordinating and discussing social protection in situations of conflict and fragility were still sort of problematically disjointed and at times limited. So stronger for coordination around the humanitarian development peace nexus around social protection was called for. Next slide. And there was a nice specific point on coordination, which was SPEAC-B common principles should be built into key performance indicators for humanitarian and resident coordinators and World Bank country offices. So where possible, sort of in the subtext of the Charter, there were the efforts to be specific around asks. On principles and standards, it was funny looking at the Venn diagram we all did at the start of this, and I plunked myself in the humanitarian thing rather than the humanitarian social protection crossover, because that's kind of still how I see myself. I think of myself as a humanitarian who pretends to know a bit about social protection. The Venn diagram of people who are here kind of reproduced the Venn diagram of people at the forum. We were lacking a bit of conflict experts. There were a few humanitarians who at times did their best to sort of be fundamentalist about humanitarian principles, but were somewhat outnumbered. And it was clear from the forum that there were still tensions between how we think about social protection principles and how we think about humanitarian principles, and where they intersect in situations of conflict and fragility, how you sort of reconcile those, and therefore a need for more clarity and understanding. And that's an ongoing effort. There was a call to sort of think about where life cycle approaches fit into social protection in conflict-affected settings, not just a default to poverty targeting and proxy means tests and other forms of trying to prioritize by vulnerability, but to think about the role of life cycle approaches in social protection and how they can be maintained or continue to be supported in conflict situations of conflict fragility. And there were calls to sort of build on this growing body of sort of practice and emerging lessons on how to support social protection in situations of conflict and fragility, develop sort of standards and guidance for how to do that better. And that's indeed starting to happen, partly through principles like the Spirit B principles, partly through initiatives like the World Bank, who are currently developing an approach paper on how they support social protection in situations of conflict and fragility. Next slide. I've kind of covered this partly in what we already discussed. The importance of recognizing that gender inclusion is particularly critical in settings of conflict and fragility, because of the way that conflict and fragility disproportionately harms women, girls, and excluded groups, and because of the particular types of vulnerability and marginalization that emerge from conflict and fragility, and the fact that social protection can help to mitigate some of those disproportionate harms, and needs to be sort of intentional in how it does that and how it designs itself to reach marginalized groups, to tackle gender transformation, to think about how it is disability sensitive, and so on. Next slide. Third-party implementation is something I was, term I hadn't come across that much until I started working a bit with the bank on this approach paper. That's World Bank terminology for funding third-party implementers to deliver social protection in situations of fragility and conflict. And there are lots of places where that might be a good or the only or an option that you have to do. And examples would include, the World Bank working with WFP and UNICEF in Somalia to deliver the Bacanano program, or the twin track approach between with WFP and UNICEF cooperating in the Sahel to work with the World Bank to deliver adaptive social protection. Clearly there's all sorts of potential and learning from how those are being implemented, but there was a feeling at the forum that emerges in this part of the Charter, where you need to be careful not to sort of default carelessly to third-party implementation, and where you do need to have third-party implementation, to think about more explicit and transparent plans for transitions to government-led social protection, and to include in that thinking about how you can deliver on, in humanitarian speak, commitments to more directly and effectively funding local and national actors. So the implementation model sort of not to carelessly default to working through international organizations, and to think about how that can transition back to national ownership and more direct national support. Next slide. Which is about financing. Yeah, so financing for social protection in settings of conflict and fragility is clearly crucially important. This is one of those apple pie type moments of the Charter where it needs to be flexible and aligned and innovative and harmonized and sequenced and so on. I mean, I guess we tiptoed around a bit the problem that one of the fundamental problems of financing is there's not enough money, but donors don't want you to say that, and they were the co-hosts, so there were tensions around just the availability of the envelope. There was a clear desire for sort of thinking about how you can get more coherent financing across sort of different streams, across humanitarian development, hopefully climate streams. There's a perception of sort of all sorts of potential in the World Banks and other international financial institutions, greater involvement in supporting social protection in situations of conflict and fragility. Cycling back to one of the previous points, a desire to focus on funding that looks beyond just transfers and thinks about broader support to systems and workforces. A recognition that often system strengthening is a relatively inexpensive part of supporting social protection in situations of fragility and conflict when compared to transfers. So you can achieve some real bang for your buck in terms of system strengthening if you just include that within big overall envelopes. And final slide on the charter. So we've had 8. This is about to be the 9th sort of point in the charter. Depending on how you edit the 14 or 15 originally there, you get 9 or 10. There was there's a longer text here, but a point around, in this forum, we found social protection systems need to mainstream considerations of peace, social justice, and better governance to mitigate harm and maximize opportunities for peace. The sort of point consistently being made was the need to be sort of intentional in thinking about how social protection might contribute to peace and needs to be conflict sensitive, and to build that into how programs are designed and monitored, and to build the evidence around ways in which social protection in situations of fragility conflict can possibly support peace and certainly be conflict sensitive. So last slide, hopefully coming in reasonably on time. Sort of next steps, this is one of them, starting to communicate what we talked about in the forum and think about how to take it forward. As I said, the Charter for Action isn't an official document. It represents collective ideas and priorities of the participants, and we want to take it forward in all sorts of ways. We found huge amounts of sort of rich experience and rich ideas that came out of the forum and fed into the forum that need to be taken forward across all sorts of areas. Partly the forum hopefully helped to sort of reinvigorate the sort of networks and communities of practice that work on these issues, and been taken forward in SP.org and the SP.org Crisis and Conflicts group, and in the SPP Principles group, and lots of other places. And so we want to sort of continue to invigorate that community of practice, and to think about the sort of steps that flow from that, including the development of standards and guidance and principles. And more specifically, FCDO announced, and other of the co-hosts supported, the intent to convene a high-level panel in 2025 that will be tasked with sort of big recommendations on how to do social protection and fragility and conflict better. And so the findings from this forum, the Charter for Action, and the invigorated community practice can all seek to feed into that high-level panel and push forward this policy agenda. And doing that really matters, because we need to provide better support to people in fragility and conflict where they need it most, in situations now like in Sudan and Gaza and Lebanon. And on that note, I will wrap up and open the floor for some questions and comments.
Oh, thank you so much. Amazing time management. You even had 2 minutes more if you wanted to. But let's open to questions. So what we are inviting participants to do is to ask question of clarification. Know that you're gonna have a bit more time to ask content question during the breakout room. So we would really welcome this to be more clarification question about what Paul has presented. You have 2 ways to do that. We'd love to see you a little bit, so we are not the 2 only ones being spotlighted here with Paul. So you can raise your hand and put your camera on and ask your question directly, or if you prefer, you can also use the chat. So the floor is yours for clarification to Paul. It can be about the forum itself. It can be about some of the areas that Paul talked about. And I know it's a lot. of information that was shared, but I'm sure you're curious about one thing or another.
And if no one has questions, or if Rachel, Bex, or anyone else wants to come in with a bit of additional reflections, do now as well.
Yeah, it's coming.
How, when, who, Anna? Good question. And I should probably defer to Sarah and or STAAR. Hopefully starting sort of March, April, and the who is being discussed. As is the why. I think it's at the early stages, but correct me if I'm wrong, Sophie or Sarah. There you are. You'll cover it later. Thank you, Sarah.
And Paul, you also have a question from Wesam. Can you clarify a bit the tensions around funding?
Well, so I mean, a tension around funding is I think this is my personal view. Part of the fundamental problem is there's just not enough money, so that people in desperate situations and situations of conflict fragility aren't receiving enough support. And what that fundamentally needs is more funding. But that's not a very popular message with donors, and who keep saying, there isn't enough money and they're not going to get any more. And so that kind of gets wiped off the agenda. And I think we still need to keep holding donors' feet to the fire about the fact that more financing is needed. Actually, both donors and host country governments. What's needed is more domestic support through taxation, even in situations of conflict and fragility, to support their own citizens, and donors need to support that better. And that's, there are some countries that are very resource constrained, but even in situations of conflict and fragility, there's more that governments themselves could do and more donors could do to support it.
Paul, I see we have a question to end up. We have Victor. Let's start with Victor. But yeah, I think I can unmute you. Let's see if that works. And I may need your help on the back end. I'm not sure the unmuting is working. Could we have Victor spotlighted?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, it works. Thank you, Victor.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Victor. I'm from Nigeria. I'm not asking a question per se, but just to, some comments. One, it's the fact that I'm excited that now we're beginning to pay attention to the link between social protection and peace and conflict. That's a very good thing to start with. And I think this is a basis for us to begin to look closely at the link between social protection and not necessarily peace, but peace building per se in humanitarian context, because my experience is that social protection is playing very, unintended roles that we have not, paid attention to before. And I think this focus on social protection and peace is a window for us to now look at the unintended outcomes that have been occurring in humanitarian and fragile and conflict settings and how they relate to peace and conflict. For example, I know that currently there's a study in the Sahel here looking at social protection and social cohesion. But funny enough, social cohesion, it's one way that peace could emerge as a result of social protection intervention. But this also could be interfered with by cash transfer, how we design and implement cash transfer. For example, is it going to be universal? Is it targeted? All of this play a role. So I'm happy that we're looking at this link now for us to understand if probably social protection has sustained some of the conflict and fragile situations rather than probably assisting to, ameliorate the needs that arise in this context. Thank you.
Great comment. Thanks, Victor. Rachel, do we want to see if we can unmute Rachel?
Yeah.
Victor, I should link you up with Michael Sampson, who was really leading on these discussions at the forum and would be fascinated to be in touch with you. And Nigeria is a great example of where, domestic resources ought to be invested in social protection, given what oil prices have been doing over the last 5 years. Rachel, over to you.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. It was great to be at the forum. It was really great place to be, great ideas. I'm just wondering, the last point on your last slide was the charter sort of represents 150 individuals who were at the forum. I'm just wondering what else you're thinking, others thinking about what that means for buy-in, what kind of platform, how are we going to sort of sell this and push it forward if it's just representing 150 somewhat, I mean, it might be by a set of individuals, who knows, but how can we get more sign up? How can we get organizational sign up? Is that the purpose of this, or we're just going to leave it as, okay, there was 150 people who met? Just curious.
Sure. And maybe while we unmute Daphne, I'll just quickly respond to that. I mean, the intent is that the organizations, particularly the co-hosts and others represented at the forum, will think about how they want to take it forward. That probably isn't, making a formal, we're signing up to this as a commitment, because it's not that sort of a document. But we hope that it will enable both, organizations and the individuals who are present and existing policy initiatives to take ideas from the charter and to take them forward as policy is being developed and as social protection in conflicts is being supported and designed. Daphne, over to you.
We'll take the last question from Daphne, then we'll move on. Daphne, over to you.
Thank you so much. And yeah, first of all, I'm Daphne from UNICEF. I used to work in Sudan, currently starting my PhD studies at UNU Merit in Maastricht. And I would have loved to be on this forum, so I'm very glad that you're giving us the key messages now. One of the questions I have is actually around research, because I know that we have obviously always this intention to inform what we do by evidence. And I was wondering if there were, during this forum, specific areas identified that would need some more research to better inform what we do in fragile contexts. And yeah, so back over to you.
So yes, short answer. Sitting as co-director of the Basic Research Programme, I should thank FCDO for a major investment in looking at social protection in situations of protracted crisis, and hopefully, basic research is starting to generate some of that evidence, as is STAAR, the technical assistance facility, but there's certainly a lead for a lot more. One of the key areas that came out in the forum was this discussion around the sort of what Victor's just been talking about, the evidence base around peace building and conflict sensitivity being weak, and the need to build the evidence base about ways in which social protection might contribute to peace building social cohesion, or indeed, as the point you made, Victor, might exacerbate tensions, and certainly that's one area that was talked about as needing a stronger evidence base. But there are many others. It's clearly an area in which both more learning of lessons from the rich experience that is starting to develop is needed, but the evidencing of those lessons is also needed. Caroline, over to you for putting us in groups.
Thank you so much. There is a last question, but I suggest we keep it for the closing remark, because I'm sure there's Sarah, you may share some things about that, but it's from Anna. What is known at this point about the high-level panel? How, when, who, etc. So let's keep that for the closing, but just to acknowledge we've seen it. And Sophie, you're responding, the need for more evidence on cost efficiency and cost effectiveness of different approaches were also discussed. Thank you for your question. This is not the only moment where you can interact. And in fact, we'd like now to invite you to choose a topic of interest. During the forum, as Paul was sharing, it was quite interactive, and the design was to really leverage all the inputs from the participants. And we'd like to keep a bit of that spirit during that webinar. So what we've decided is to offer you the choice of the subject that you'd like to learn a little bit more on. And we have 5 parallel sessions that are going to run in a few minutes. And so those 5 sessions are, you're gonna be able to discuss with Rick on peace and conflict sensitivity. So if you are willing to participate to that session, you will have to stay in plenary. A note as well that for those of you that prefer to have interpretation in French, this is the only session which will have interpretation. So please stay in the plenary so you can benefit from that interpretation. Just few words, Rick, you are DEI's social protection lead and you sit on STAAR wider technical leadership team. So you will be with Rick discussing peace and conflict sensitivity if you want to in the plenary. If you're interested to dig a little bit more deeper into principles, standards, and coordination to see what is written in the charter and what were the discussion, you can reach Paul in a parallel session, and I'll explain to you in a second how to go there. Rebecca Holmes will be hosting a session on gender and inclusion. So Rebecca, you're a technical lead for the STAAR facility and you're especially focusing on gender and social inclusion. If you want to learn more about financing, there was lots of discussion around financing during the forum. So you can go with Sarah Dalrymple. You're the crisis lead in FCDO social protection team, and you're responsible for STAAR and basic research. And you were also chairing the steering committee for the forum. So join Sarah if you're curious about financing. And finally, if you want to learn about implementing models, then please join Sophie Pongracz. You're also a technical lead for STAAR facility and you're responsible for crisis. So that is the setup. You're gonna have 25 minutes to hear a bit more about what has happened around those different areas, but the intention is really to host a discussion. So you're all muted, you're all off video in that plenary, but once you reach your breakout room, we're gonna invite you to put your camera on. You will be able to unmute yourself, and if you, once the discussion starts, you can raise your hand and discuss. The chat is also available, but to make this a little bit more lively, we would really recommend that you can all be on camera and discussing one with another. You're going to have 5 minutes presentation and then up to 20 minutes of discussion. We have a bit more time, so that is great. How it's going to happen? So in few seconds, we will open the rooms and you will see on your screen, great, thank you for the slides. You will see on the bottom of your, on the bar of your Zoom, you will see breakout rooms. So you can click on that and you'll see the name of the different sessions. So if you see the number 2 on your slide, you see room 1, room 2. In this setup, you will see financing or principles and standards. So it's quite easy. You click join to the session you want to participate. And if you want to participate, you just click yes. Remember, peace and conflict will not be listed as a breakout because it will remain in the breakout. So if that's the session you want to attend, you're supposed to stay there. Just a last note, technically, it may happen that you will disconnect from the discussion. If that happens, once you join back, you will join in plenary. So please be silent, let the group discussion continue, but follow the same process, click on breakouts and join the room that you were participated in, and you will be able to continue the discussion with your colleagues. I think I've said everything I needed to. I hope you will have interesting and fruitful discussion. And with that, we can open the breakout rooms. Let me know if this is working. Rick, I think maybe in a few seconds you can probably start.
I'm just trying to figure out how I can tell who remains behind. All the
I know. It's
Anybody that
you-
can't make a decision to join another group ends up with me. That's great.
enjoy your discussions.
Yeah, please stay. So who have we got? Is this yeah, so I think all those that are not assigned stay here, which is great. So welcome everybody. We've got I'm gonna talk and summarize for about 5 minutes, and then we've got about 20 minutes to discuss. Hold on a second. Let me share presentation slides if I can. Yeah. Good. I hope people can see that and presentation. So this this discussion is the what on peace and conflict sensitivity. I'm not sure what happened to Paul's kind of summary, but he, the section, the notes on this section were somewhat blank, which is great because it gives us an open slate to discuss. I've got 3 slides to go through, and then some prompts for open questions, if you can bear with me. This is the first time that I've kind of repitched and reflected on the conference proceedings. So I probably won't have everything all polished, and it's open to interpretation and modification thereafter. But I thought it would be a useful start to say that my impression on this topic in the discussions during the forum are that both conflict sensitivity and peace need further conceptual framing and to develop a mutual understanding of what they are, how they behave, our relationship with these terms and dynamics, and there is and that and given the confusion and lack of clarity and definition of these terms, there is a huge amount of research and evidence and unpacking that needs to happen. I don't know if Daphne who is in this group, she made the comment that whether there was extra research needed. I've got several PhDs in the course of my presentation to define. Let me try and move on the slide. There you go. Right. So I thought it was be helpful to start off with a very basic pair of definitions and a differentiation between what we mean by conflict sensitivity and what we mean by peace building. This is my interpretation, but I hope it's a useful start to formulate a common conceptual framing across our community. So when we talk about conflict, I see conflict sensitivity as being more at program level, which is by and large the area of work that we as practitioners, aid agencies, even people, policy people in donor agencies, etc., as well as implementation in the field, have responsibility for and relatively direct collective control over. These are program design, understanding, the degree to which program design is couched in an understanding of conflict dynamics at all levels. So from individual level, household, community, local, regional, national, etc. To what extent are the dynamics of conflict taken into account when designing, delivering, monitoring, assessing the delivery of social protection? Peace building, on the other hand, in my mind, is a higher level idea that deals with the extent to which social protection as a basic service, ultimately the responsibility to be provided for by government or the government authority, addresses the underlying grievance that has led to conflict. Right. So if there's a deficit of investment or resource or a lack of access with a particular group of people that has contributed to overspilt into conflict, then there's a hypothesis, following the third point on this slide, that if conflict sensitivity improves, i.e. if we do better programming, then we, as working in the humanitarian development peace nexus space, can offer a solution that supports peace, the big picture, right? Does it fill a gap and address a grievance that underlines the conflict? Right. So move on to the next slide, if you're following. So I've got one slide on kind of unpacking the detail on conflict sensitivity and another one on peace to explain this a little bit further. So from discussions around the conflict, the conference, the forum, there are undoubtedly some good examples of some examples of good practice, and there's a whole range of experiences and case studies that that's very good news and is the right thing, but they are somewhat piecemeal and anecdotal. On the other hand, there are some widespread practices that tend to undermine people's, and I said on the slide, but beneficiaries, recipients, people who've been included and those that have been excluded, their experience of humanitarian CVA and government-led or government presented social protection in conflict settings. And these are common topics of discussion. I'm sure you're familiar with the arguments that targeting is never perfect, that there are different transfer values used by different programs, different approaches. There is a high degree of uncertainty about protection of individuals' personal data and what that gets used for. Short, finite terms of projectized aid, and importantly, that different objectives of humanitarian aid and social protection, and those differences are important. And while there's there is every reason to try and align those two, there are also good reasons for why they remain different. So there is really insufficient analysis and independent evaluations that leaves the evidence for a lot of the claims very weak. And this, the evidence that exists does not tend to substantiate the claims, some small, some quite exaggerated, that that is all is well, and that that they're pointing the pathways to replication and sustainability and good practice. So the evidence for that social protection results in social cohesion at community level and upwards from there is not sufficient, I would say, to really justify an expansion of approaches to justify further investment and in these areas. It's not to say that it shouldn't be done. And this is a call for much greater open analysis and reflection. And I think it would be helpful to develop a framework on the principles and evidence to to support continuous improvement, such as we have with the gender responsive aspects of social protection. We could have a spectrum ranging from conflict uninformed to do no harm, which would be a really good benchmark starting point for all programming, towards contributing for peace. And this is all aligned and supported with conversations on related topics that are being discussed elsewhere. So at the level of peace, we have so many examples of conflict resolution, addressing grievances, that has resulted in increased investment in basic services, including social protection. And these contexts vary enormously from demobilization and resolution of civil wars, to addressing the marginalization of groups in sometimes hard to reach areas. Sometimes they are settlements on resource sharing and access and a redistribution of benefits. There is some documentation of this. The University of Edinburgh has a database of 150 conflicts that have been resolved. That would be a really good starting point to unpack that, a kind of a typology to start to understand how basic services, social protection, fits as part of that deal. The extent to which basic services, Vincent is gone. The extent to which basic services are part of a peace settlement, and that ensure the redefinition of a social contract. This is part of, this is what happens at the time of a peace settlement. What is the offer of the political elite to citizens in addressing that grievance? Improving a governing authority's provision of public goods is a fundamental role of state. It is core to defining that social contract. The other functions of state being, are broadly protection and security, provision of infrastructure, of trade protection, of basic services, and participation, representation, taxation, and democracy. So the role of state cannot be defined and delivered by aid, right? So that's a bold statement, because that's kind of, I think that cuts across what a lot of the claims that are being made in the discourse at the forum.
Really?
I think I maintain that this is defined as as part of a political bargain and not as part of an aid offer. So the challenge of aid agencies is to help moderate that political bargain, to ensure that disadvantaged groups are included, but it's not core to striking that bargain. So it's difficult to bridge the objectives of humanitarian cash voucher assistance, which is life-saving short-term, with government-led social protection, which is essentially part of a domestic political settlement. So as I said, there are good reasons to align them in the interests of efficiency, but there are also good reasons why they are and maybe should remain separate. Right, sorry.
Caroline, just a time check that you have 10 minutes.
Sorry, just finding my buttons to go on to the ask. People have questions. There you go. So open, oops, I'm not managing to do this properly. There you go. So open to the floor for discussion. Please welcome your thoughts and reactions and contributions. My guide questions here are, to what extent do you agree with the priorities outlined in the this section of the chapter, of the charter, which is I think section 15 in the written document. Anything you would want to change, or any significant issues that you see. What do you think will help define the conceptual framework for conflict sensitivity? And what do you think can enable or hinder the operationalization of these ideas? So please, over to you. Victor, you have your hand up. Would you like to turn your mic on? And
all right, thanks, Rick. So just to sort of respond to, and also look at some of the things you said, I think as a way of moving this field of research forward in terms of conceptualization, I find it very easy to conceptualize peace and peace building using the pillars of peace framework. That is the positive peace indicators, which was developed by the Institute for Economics and Peace. And I think it's been a very good database, because every year since 2000 and maybe 10, 11, we have data on positive peace and on negative peace across the globe. So that could be a good conceptual framework to start looking at how social protection relates to this conceptual framework as a way of also seeing how it relates to peace. Well, I had done a study around that, but it's very funny to see that social protection could link to four pillars of the framework, and doesn't speak directly to the other four. So conceptualizing peace and peace building, that would be a good starting point with the positive peace index, and that would be fine. And then secondly, I think to also conceptualize the field a little bit is also, but what theories do we explore to sort of understand the relationship between social protection and peace in fragile and conflict setting? I will just suggest that I think I find the dynamical complex systems theory, which was advanced by Peter Collier in some research around 2012. Now that complex systems theory, dynamical complex system theory, really provides a good framework for us to understand how social protection would relate to conflict, peace, and also how we could make social protection programs conflict sensitive. I will just stop at that point for now, and as the discussions go, I'll make more contributions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Victor. We'll have to talk more and be in touch on that. Who else would like to raise a hand and speak? I'm sorry, I can't see everything in the chat that's going on, but please speak rather than using the chat box.
Oh, hello.
Vincent.
Sorry. Wesam, did you want to go first? I'm not sure if you put your hand up first.
Please, Vincent, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so I think conceptually, I'd maybe just add some nuance on 2 points that you raised, Rick, right? One is around how you looked at conflict sensitivity, and one is around peace. So on conflict sensitivity, I would say you have the way we look at a WFP, we're looking at it from two angles, and it has to do with how we classify risk as an organization, right? Risk, whether it's strategic risk or whether it's a risk that is more programmatic or fiduciary, related to the beneficiaries we serve. And you can simplify, we try to simplify it in two elements. One is the part that you raised, which is around the programmatic elements of do no harm, and how do you set up interventions so they minimize the risks of doing harm. And that very much is a programmatic question, right? Like, is a cash transfer going to do more harm than an in-kind? Is this targeting going to be more dangerous than that? The more difficult question that we're trying to answer is the strategic element of engagement, right? Is to what degree, if you're engaging in a context where the government itself might be a party to conflict, are you then, potentially legitimizing a government that's deemed illegitimate, or are you affecting your neutrality or operational independence from humanitarian stance? So we look at conflict sensitivity really from two different aspects, and that strategic aspect does it really have a commonly defined framework, right? So It's much more a kind of a political economy-based assessment of, can you engage with this government or the subnational level, etc., and to what extent do you engage in something that's visibly about building capacities and systems versus, you know, trying to align with what might have existed or what might exist in the future, and plan a transition process in the future, right? So that's from a conflict sensitivity sense. From the peace, I think it's really important to look between the big P, right? Kind of, are you contributing to a settlement of a dispute? Are you contributing to stability and stabilization by reducing scarcity-driven inequalities or tensions, right? So that's the type of pathways you can come up with. And I think that is very hard to say, right? Because rarely does a social service precede a political settlement, right? You have political settlement and then you decide. But I think when you frame, and I do frame social protection as a social contract, it then becomes about what exactly is the contract you're trying to achieve in a given setting. And that contract is not necessarily just the traditional Western model of cash transfers and school meals and disability grants, etc., right? There are social contracts that exist already that have to do with redistribution of resources to the most vulnerable. And often, even in conflict, when the state-society contract is fractured, there's still a lot of community-based social contracts that are precisely around redistribution. So conflict sensitivity and peace needs to be put in the context of, are you harming or supporting existing social contracts that people already find themselves in? And then I wouldn't say that doing good conflict sensitivity is potentially a support to peace. I would say doing good conflict sensitivity is the base minimum, right? You have to do conflict sensitivity, or you are almost willfully being conflict blind and saying it's okay to potentially risk. But there are specific things you can do in the way you design your programmatic interventions that can make it more likely that a social contract is strengthened, whether it's a cash transfer, school feeding, or livelihood programming.
Sorry to interrupt. There is only 2 more minutes in that session, so I just want to flag that. And I see that Rachel has her hand up. So if we want to also hear that voice, thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
Thanks, Caroline. Rachel, come in. And Wesam as well. So you've got 1 minute each.
I think, yeah, Wesam was first. We couldn't unmute.
Oh, yes.
Wesam. So let Wesam, and then I'm fine. I don't
have
need
1 minute each.
Oh, thank you very much, Rachel, and thanks, Rick. I thought that was really interesting. And I definitely agree with how you position, the conflict sensitivity at one level and peace at probably the higher level. I would be cautious about how we look at grievances. If we think about who rebels, grievances may be enough to get people to rebel, but does it sustain rebellion? And I think here we'll probably see other forms of selective incentives, maybe a wage for fighting and for rebellion, maybe a move in rank or position for maybe the more loyal combatants. And so if we were to position social protection as a reintegration tool, I think this may risk solidifying this idea around money and fighting or quitting the fight. And so just to be careful about that, and maybe that draws us around the discussions around how we target people for social protection services. Thank you.
Very good point. Thank you, Wesam. Rachel, do you want to make a
I
quick
see
point?
people
Yeah,
joining
Rick, it was
quickly.
literally a definitional point around conflict sensitivity, because I think you framed it as a framing issue, a bit like Vincent was saying. I think you framed it around what kind you have to do to adapt your programs in that context. But I think for me and others, conflict sensitivity is around the interaction between the intervention and the context. So how does your intervention itself shape the conflict and the peace process? Rather than just saying, oh, this is what we have to do. It's like, well, when I do this, what does it do to the context? Anyway, we can talk about it another time. Thanks.
Fantastic. Lots more discussions to have. Thank you, Rachel. Thanks, everybody. I think we return. Well, we stay here and let other people return to this meeting group. Right. Okay. Great.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you were not caught in the middle of a key sentence. It's always frustrating to have limited time, but I hope you had interesting discussion. First point is, I think in the chat, and maybe we can repost that at some point, but you have the link to the charter. So if you want to read a bit more, you can always go to the report itself. But I hope you've enjoyed learning live a little bit more from it. And we'd like to spend just a few minutes now. You've been hearing a little bit about what happened during the forum, some of the key points that were mentioned as the call for action as an outcome of this event. You've been also participating to those topic-based discussion, and we have shared with you in the chat a link to Mentimeter again. And we'd like you to reflect, to take a minute for yourself and just to think, what do I take out of this session? An insight from the discussion, or something you'd like to use moving ahead in your work. So yes, what do you take from that sharing that is of interest for you? If you can take a minute and write your insights in this Menti, then we can have an idea of how things have landed for you. So I'm just going to be silent for a minute so you can think for yourself. And Anna, I think if you want to share the results as they appear, it can still be good. I'm going to read some of those. Coordination really isn't working. For example, in Lebanon, it needs to be about strategy and policy, not just transfers. We assume much more knowledge about how to do social protection in fragility than there is actually. And things are moving, so I'm skipping some. Think through better common challenges of forcibly displaced people to access support versus specific needs. Tension between humanitarian and social protection principles is much clearer for me now. We need more evidence to confidently understand how social protection might promote peace and be conflict sensitive in different settings, to work on information access of actors in conflict settings. Is enforcement of principle needed, or is the idea of principle policing alarming? Lots of open question for this closing, which means it's lively discussions and work that needs to continue. We need to get humanitarians to understand social protection and how to link up better and use systems. Too much pushback on basis of principle, but sometimes it's possible. Seems the forum has set the foundation for further sensitization of relevant government and donors, which will require more follow-up in the future. The need for maintaining momentum and following up. Need to bring in other disciplines to help frame conflict and peace. No conflict people in the Venn diagram. Yes. Coordination through the nexus is crucial, but so complicated to put in place and need to be flexible, adaptable to context specificity. Put the needs of the most vulnerable people on the planet as our firm collective objective. I expected social protection first to come out of more strongly. How can we take forwards? Thank you for that. And I think it's very important to hear from you how things resonated and to keep that spirit of understanding from specialists and people on the field. So thank you for that. With this, we're coming close to the end of this webinar, but I'd like to invite one of our forum participants to share a little bit his experience and takeaway from the forum. So I'm going to ask Wesam Qaid to join us. Wesam, you're the Deputy Managing Director of the Yemen Social Fund for Development, and you're overseeing the institution movements to greater integrated and community development approaches. So Wesam, you've been in the forum for the 3 days, actively participating. So my question to you is if you can share some reflection about the forum, how what stood out for you, how is it relevant for your context, and also how are you planning to move this forward? So over to you. We'd like to hear from your experience.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to reflect. You know, about my experiences over the forum and after. You know, I think as practitioners, we came together in Rome to work out how to strengthen social protection in difficult places. And
Wesam, we don't hear you anymore, and maybe you also want to put your camera on so we can see you. We see you, but we don't hear you now.
can you hear me now?
Now, yes, wonderful. And maybe you can be spotlighted so we can see you even better.
Sorry.
You're all set.
Sorry, I have a problem with my screen.
We see you and we see your background, but were you hoping to share slides or? Can you hear us, Wesam?
Yes, sorry, I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
So what I wanted to say really was that what was clear to me during the forum is that the politics, the policy.
So far, we're not hearing neither. Wesam, we have a sound issue. I don't know if maybe you can talk closer to the microphone.
Is this better? Hello?
Yeah, you're still far.
I think we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we're hearing you okay, Wesam.
Oh, thank you. I've got a power issue. The power's gone off and I'm working on solar. So if there are issues, let me know. But there's very little I can do. So what I was saying was that the kind of policy and the politics aspects doesn't really favor what we want to achieve. It's pretty much business as usual and supply driven. But we came to Rome to kind of work together to change that. I think sometimes I'm guilty myself of getting bogged down in the day-to-day routine of business as usual. And that kind of risks, for me, underplaying the importance of politics in favor of like the technical fixes of social protection on the ground. And that can be frustrating because it feels like you're working against the grain. So we really do need the policy in place. And we collectively worked hard over the 3 days, especially the last day, on articulating our experiences and knowledge. And we did that to kind of inform the politics. So I think that's a huge step in itself. But one thing that I think we want to be careful about is, and it's a small thing, but it's very important, is that politics and policy takes time. There's this issue of lead time. And we can predict getting to the policy will take many, many months, if not years. So I think Paul mentioned earlier on that, you know, one of the way stations along on this journey is it will be this high-level panel announced by FCDO to take place sometime next year. Nonetheless, there's a lot of time between now and getting to a policy that really supports what we want to achieve. My point really is that what do we do in the meantime? And what we do in the meantime is going to be critical. And I think we can continue to inform policy from what we're doing on the ground, the good lessons, the not so good lessons. I talked a little bit during the forum on adaptive leadership. And I think it's important maybe to dig a bit deeper into that. But also we have the outliers, the positive deviants. There are things that we wouldn't expect should be happening, but they are, and they're quite good. So at the forum, and after returning to Yemen, I met with practitioners who had worked in the Sahel, and I found them to be resource-rich in adaptive leadership. And if I can project that in a single word, it would be empathy. So teams from across organizations, maybe sectors, government, they are listening to one another, they're sharing experiences, they are collaborating, and they are coordinating with intent. In Yemen, we're in a competitive mode, so very different. We are suspicious even of one another, and it's exhausting. We're missing this opportunity to leverage for deeper impact. So adaptive leadership and the empathy around that. And having said that, in Yemen, we do have these interesting outliers. You know, how does the Social Fund for Development, how does it continue to grow? How do we pilot referrals without having a line of funding for it? How do you get the political support from the warring side to agree to reimagine a social registry and what that would look like? Or is it that the financial resource crunch is the silver lining for change? So what's behind the positive deviance? Is it chance or is it design? Maybe both. But I think what I'm trying to say is that we have time on our sides to understand it. And if we can understand that, we can better inform the policy. So maybe in a sentence, use the lead time between now and getting a supportive policy in place to learn more about the outliers and the leadership behind the good examples of social protection in hard places, and to continue to inform both the policy and the practice.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Wesam, for sharing your perspective and hopes for what needs to come next. Thanks again. We now coming to the closing moment of this webinar. So I'd like to invite Sarah, if you can say some few words, closing words, closing of this webinar, and also maybe telling us a little bit more about what's happening next. So over to you, Sarah. We see you. Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, no, sorry, I wasn't able to unmute, but I am now because the hosts have allowed me. So thank you. Okay, well, some closing remarks. I wanted to give a bit of background as to why we made the decision as FCDO to convene the forum and what are the next steps. So we made the decision to convene the forum as FCDO really because we know that social protection offers so much potential as a key enabler to development that is not being realised. And there's so many reasons why social protection is not meeting its potential. And some of them, you know, were touched on today in Paul's presentation and in the breakout groups, but really down to limited resources, you know, financing mechanisms that are not fit for purpose in fragile and conflict settings, low risk appetites to engage in these contexts, poor coordination between humanitarian development and peace-building actors, and limited political buy-in of governments and donors. And common misassumptions, really, that you can't do social protection in conflict when it's difficult to work with and through governments. We know that this is not true. It's tricky, but it is possible. And I think it's no longer a choice, really, to demonstrate and push on this agenda. You know, we're witnessing an unprecedented scale of crises globally. And when we know what potential social protection has, we really must overcome this challenge collectively. And so we, you know, FCDO, really do identify this lack of political buy-in, you know, that Wesam talked about, on the role of social protection in these contexts as the major barrier that we face. And others have alluded to it in the Menti comments. So without the political buy-in of governments and donors on the value of social protection in these contexts, it's impossible to unlock the financing we need to strengthen the coverage in these contexts. And so FCDO will be supporting the establishment of a high-level panel that will be delivered in 2025. The primary aim of the panel is to generate political buy-in on the value of social protection in fragile and conflict contexts. So why a high-level panel? You know, why do we think this is the best approach? Well, we think it will help enable continuity from the discussions at the forum and to take forward the priorities identified in the Charter through the high-level panel. The Charter will be shared with the high-level panel, members to take forward and to prioritise themselves based on consultations with multi-stakeholders. You know, we recognise that we can't drive change with technical discussions alone. So as I've said, we really think we need senior representatives on this panel that have, you know, global recognition and respect and have that ability to drive momentum and generate wider buy-in. We saw with the high-level panel on cash in 2015 what can be achieved. You know, it became widely accepted after that panel that cash should be the preferred and default modality for delivery. And before this, there wasn't the same level of buy-in and much resistance. And, you know, in some cases, we are seeing backtracking on that, but, you know, it still remains accepted broadly that cash is the default modality if possible. But we also recognise it's not just about global buy-in. You know, it doesn't always translate to buy-in at the country level. And this came out of the forum, the need for such a high-level panel operating at a global level to potentially play a role in unlocking opportunities and generating buy-in at the country level. So we hope the high-level panel will set out priorities on that as well. So we still got to work out the composition of the panel, who's on it. That's going to be worked out, and we hope that it will be set up to run from March next year. We hope that it will focus with predominantly on financing and coordination and other priority issues, but we've already identified financing and coordination as real barriers as a result of the forum. So the technical team will be appointed for delivering the high-level panel and appointing its members through STAAR. And they will lead on the synthesis of evidence and consultations with key actors to inform the panel's priorities and recommendations. So do watch this space. And just to close, I wanted to thank the STAAR team, Caroline from IPK, for the incredible work on delivering this forum, in addition to socialprotection.org for organising this webinar. I think it's been really great to kind of set out to a wider set of stakeholders what was discussed at the forum, because it isn't just about the people that came to the forum. We want this to be a global effort, and the forum was just really laying that foundation. So yeah, we look forward to working with you all as we drive this agenda forward in 2025 and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. We are on time, and so this is time to end. A big thank you for each presenters, for everybody in the breakout room, and for the support from sp.org. So have a lovely day ahead. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.